Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey La Rochelle. I'm the supervisor of the climate resilience team within Finesse. And I'm happy to be working with our team on this inaugural climate resiliency webinar topic on salmon resiliency. I'm Zooming today from Nanaimo territory in Nanaimo, where I live and work. Love the beautiful territory on the island. And a few housekeeping things before we get on with some of the topics. We always record our information sessions and our webinars, and we put it on our Finesse webinar playlist along with the agenda and the PowerPoints. I've put in the chat my email, so if people don't have that link and you want to watch any of the info sessions that we've done, including these types of webinars, I'll share it with you. And I'd like to briefly ask any of the climate resilience team members to introduce themselves. And maybe Christopher, if you could start, and just the area where you work and live and the communities that you work with.
Well, Lawe Tesuel, Christopher Peters, Teltsui. I'm Stalo Nation and predominantly work with the Coast Salish communities in the Lower Mainland.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else on my team other than Hiamara here? Sorry, I have a lot of people on my screen.
I'm here, Mandy. Hi,
Go
everyone.
ahead, Mandy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mandy. I'm one of the other climate resilience coordinators. I'm located in the very beautiful traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx people in beautiful Penticton.
And then Hiamara, you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. My name is Hiomara O'Brien. I am one of the regional climate resilience coordinators. I work for the coastal area of BC. I live in beautiful Boyne Island in the Coast Salish territory.
Thank you for that. And if the team can put your names and emails in the chat, if anyone wants to follow up you through, that would be great. So in the agenda, we always do our best, if we're not super flooded with participants, to do a round robin of introductions. And I think we have enough number of people to do that. Just if you're willing to share your name, your position within the community, any expectations you have of this webinar, and any specific question that you may have about salmon resilience or river restoration. And then in the presentation, if those aren't answered, you could see in the agenda on number 3 that we have time for questions and answers. If people are having problems with their video or their sound, you could also introduce yourself and put your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to monitor. So I'll call people on my screen as I see them. And Carrie Alex, Okanagan Nation Alliance, thank you so much for putting this on.
You're welcome. Thank you guys, everybody, for having me. So my name is Carrie. I work for the Okanagan Nation. I am a fisheries biologist and geomorphologist. I'm also, like Mandy, live and work in Penticton in the unceded territories of the Syilx people. And I am happy to share today. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Harry.
Hi, good morning. Patrick Harry. I'm a emergency preparedness technician with Latamalamon Health Society, which translates to the Good Medicine Health Society. We're based out of Kamloops. We work with our Sequibum communities, and we're lucky enough to work out of Tecumloops to Sequibum. Looking forward to the discussion today. I am originally from Stretchum First Nation and banks of the Fraser River, so big interest in salmon. Thank you. Look forward to today.
Thank you. Next on my screen, Kevin Brown. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Brown. I'm from Old Mascot here on Hatigwai, on the north end of Hatigwai. And I've spent in my previous life, I was a manager of a salmon enhancement hatchery that still exists today, and working on community-based fishery as well. And we are definitely interested in revitalizing our rivers and streams as we have Hatigwai. We have 5,000 kilometers of logging roads and 115 kilometers one highway of domestic. So there's a lot of work to be done here on Hatigwai. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful territory we're from. Reminds me of my home in Haisla territory. Juan Sereno, good to see you, Juan.
Good morning, everyone. Nice seeing you too, Case. It's been a long time. I've been traveling, being sick, and debating whether if I want to keep on doing what I'm doing. So the bad news is that I decided to keep on doing what I'm doing. I'm currently providing services to Nicomen Indian Band and working alongside and with the regional district. I believe it's Thompson Nicola Regional District and communities from along the canyon. Representing and serving the Nicomen Indian Band and working alongside with the communities in the canyon. And we do have a strong interest in the health of salmon. As everybody knows, those are communities that heavily depend on the health and numbers of salmon that goes through the communities. So that's what I'm here today. I'm glad to see you again. And by the way, I just touched bases with Kay, and we're going to have a nice visit in Nicomen in the next few days, hopefully. Sechanaya.
Great. Thank you. Cameron Lilua. Cameron, if you're able to introduce yourself or.
Hey, Cameron Lilloy here. I'm the emergency program coordinator for the Maya Valley Aniqua team, and I'm here to learn about the salmon, especially what happened recently with the Chilco River. That was wild.
Thank you. Julie DeDecker. Sorry if I got that wrong, Julie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Decker. I am the emergency emergency policy and safety officer at Sumas First Nation. I'm a little obsessed with the salmon, gotta admit. This has happened just over the last, I started in July, and I'm not afraid to tell you that I have numerous videos, just even from Kilgar Creek. And I have such an interest now and such a renewed appreciation for salmon. And the struggle is real when I see the creek and see them moving up there, and especially after the atmospheric river in 2021. We had flooding here, and so it's interesting. I've been working on a file, so to see the before and after, and it just amazed me when I actually saw the salmon in the creek. So this is all new to me, and I'm very happy to be here. I have zero expectations because I'm really at the bottom of the barrel for learning here. So I appreciate this.
Thank you, Julie. Love the enthusiasm, and I love salmon as well. Nicole from Tla'amin Nation.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. My name is Nicole, and I'm a settler originally from Switzerland and Panama. And I'm honored enough to be working with the Tla'amin Nation. It's been about a year and a half that I've been working as a traditional ecological knowledge coordinator. And in my work, I have been trying to provide any help to the nation with mostly, I think, with traditional food security and climate change mitigation. And yes, of course, who doesn't love salmon? So I am just really excited to be here and just to make new connections and yeah, work together and learn more together. Thank you so much, Emet.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good to see Tlaman here. Allison Lohman with Finesse.
That's my voice. So, Alison Loman with Finesse. I focus mostly on emergency plan development and then response plans very specific to an event. And then obviously all the plans are driven by community and very, very community specific.
Thank you, Allison. And I hope you get better too. Tea and honey, that's what I always hear. Christine from Stahalis. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Christine King, if you're able to introduce yourself. We could always circle back to. I'll call upon Dan Cameron.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dan Cameron. I'm the new emergency response coordinator here at the Suminas people. Over my 34-year career, it's been military, policing, critical infrastructure, forensics, and it's been kind of a bipolar career. But this is quickly turning into the highlight of my career. I came out of retirement to take this position, and truthfully, when it comes to salmon, I don't know a whole lot. I worked extensively with the Tanaka Nation of the South Kootenays and especially with the Akanuki people outside of Creston. So this is going to be a learning experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you, and nice to meet you virtually, Dan, and thank you for joining us. So spur of the moment. Jolene Rendelik.
Hello, glad to be here. I'm Jolene. I am Community Safety Coordinator for Chalath Band. I'm glad to be here and learn anything I can about the salmon.
Glad to have you here, Jolene. Clint Williams.
Oh, good morning. A little slow on the buttons this morning. Good morning, Clint Williams with the Natsamat Tribal Council, the Emergency Preparedness Advisor. Just excited to kind of sit through the presentation and see what's happening and if there's any help needed. The salmon are just so important to us culturally and personally, and yeah, just a valuable resource. So just excited to see the presentation and see what you're thinking, Casey.
Thank you, Clint. There's note taker Paul. I think there's a few of you on. I don't know, Paul, if you're able to introduce yourself. It shows up as Fireflies AI. Note taker Paul. And we can always circle back if we miss anyone. James Fothergill Brown.
Hello, good morning. James Alfred Fothergill Brown. James Brown here from Paquachin First Nation. Yeah, I'm struggling to determine whether AI has inundated my machines too, because it seems to indicate that there's an AI taking notes for me too, despite me never giving any permission. But aside from that, thanks for doing this. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to catch up on some of the work that our marine crew have been doing in terms of climate adaptation and restoration of the lands around here. So more than anything, yes, this is an opportunity for me to catch up to the wonderful work that that crew's been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Maria Catanzaro.
Hello. You said that very well. It's usually not the case. I'm Maria. I live on the Kwanghan territory, colonially known as Victoria. I learned about this webinar through a colleague who has been in chat with Zawamara. So I hope that it's okay that I'm here. I'm with the Pacific Salmon Foundation. So, yep, I'm always learning about salmon and climate, and I'm really looking forward to just learning from everyone and also seeing how how we could potentially help.
Thank you. If you can put your name and website of your organization in the chat, people can go check it out if they'd like to learn more.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
On my screen, I see Lynn Pinnell, Stamanis First Nation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Pinnell. I'm here today representing Stamanis First Nation as our Salish Sea Initiative Coordinator. In my role, I coordinate environmental stewardship projects, and we're looking at doing some restoration on one of our local salmon creeks. So very excited to learn more today from everyone here. Thank you.
Nice to have you. Lytton First Nation, Mr. Roy Spinks. I think you're on mute, Roy. There we go. Roy, we're not able to hear you. I don't know if you want to put any introduction in the chat.
Can
You're
you hear me
welcome.
now?
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
All right, on. I switched from a laptop to a desktop, and I have to add microphones and a video camera too. So Yerrick Shinonon, McCain Hanshquest. My name is Roy Spinks. I'm the implementation manager for Lytton First Nation. So I do just about anything for Lytton First Nation to support our people. I've been born and raised on salmon. Part of our tradition is when our babies are cutting their teeth, we eat or we feed them what we call claitwan. That's dried salmon skin that helps break through the skin. So I've been eating salmon every year for the most of my life, except for when it's closed, and we generally try to save can enough salmon for at least 2 or 3 years. And if it does come down to 3 years, we really start hoarding it away and stop sharing. So I'm really interested in learning and participating and conversating with everybody here. And I'm glad to see Juan Sereno here as well. Worked with him in the past, and I'm glad that he's working at Nikaman because Nikaman is what we call our fish market. And yeah, there's a lot of fish that come out of there. Cookstown, almost.
Nice to see you as well, Roy. Take care.
Thank you, Roy. Nathan Whistler, Finesse, do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Nathan, if you're able to?
Right. Yeah, right. Nathan Whistler Quest. I'm here working up in Asin Kamloops territory. Data engineer, so I'll just be sitting in on the call, just soaking in knowledge. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Andrew Sheriff, Malahat Nation.
Hello, my name is Andrew Sheriff. I'm the fisheries program lead for Malahat Nation. We're excuse me, we're running several programs right now and looking forward to learning a bit more about river restoration.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just briefly interject that our team is looking at how we can support knowledge sharing, the good work that First Nations are doing, but also work throughout the province, throughout Canada, throughout the world. And we're collecting and reviewing a lot of information, including on salmon, fisheries, especially the climate impacts, coastal marine areas, marine use planning areas. And we're quite happy to share. We need to organize that and say, how does it best be presented? But we're pretty excited about that knowledge transfer, and both from communities, but also sharing the very latest in climate research and climate data. Rebecca Wiley, LTC.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rebecca Riley. I'm the fisheries manager at Lillooet Tribal Council here. I'm excited to learn what we're going to be learning today. Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good to see you here. And we miss Daryl. Daryl always does great work at LTC as well. We hope he's doing well. Kay Bright, do you want to briefly introduce yourself, Kay? I know you did in the chat, I think.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kay Bright. I am the Decision Support Supervisor. Happy to be here. And yeah, I'm calling in the traditional territory of the Shimshan territory of the Kitsim, Kalem, and Kitsilis lands here in Terrace. Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Kay. Jane Healy.
Good morning. I'm Jane Healy. I work for Pacific Salmon Foundation along with Maria, and I work in the climate adaptation program focusing on salmon recovery planning. And I'm also visiting from Tsimshian territory in Terrace on the Skeena River.
Awesome. I was born in Terrace, and a lot of my family from Heisla live in Terrace. I know it very well. And Hiamara, I see in the chat someone's offered to also present if we can capture that in our records. Leona Humchit, Heiltsuk First Nation. Hi, Leona.
My name is Leona Humchit. I'm from the Heiltsuk Nation of beautiful Bella Bella, BC. For those of you that might not know where that is, it's up on the Pacific coast of BC. We're on an island, and I'm really happy to be here today. This invite landed in my inbox, and salmon. We're salmon people also, and we know and recognize that it has a very strong nutritional, economic, and spiritual needs for our people. I'm the climate action coordinator for my nation. We have a community-led community energy plan that we ratified back in 2021. Very strong community engagement. And one of the things that we learned was our people are suffering from climate grief and climate trauma. And that, also relates to the stark decline in our natural resources in our water, including salmon. I've been sad, uptight, and, going through my own trauma, knowing that we need to prioritize salmon. And also, why is it not on the species at risk? Because I know south of the border that they've managed to get their salmon on they don't call it species at risk. I don't remember what it is. But I wanted to share that when we engaged our people, food sovereignty ranked number one. And that we need to collectively, take the work out of silos and work really strong, hand in hand to save our salmon. I'm happy that this invite landed in my inbox. I'm happy to be here. Aska.
Thank you. We're happy you're here, and thank you for sharing. Trent Mores, Skidegate. I see he's put something in the chat. Trent Mores, Deputy Chief Counselor, Haida from Skidegate, Haida, and he's in another meeting, but he's listening in. I see someone with the name D. Cox. If you're able to introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's me. Dane Cox, working with Vanessa as a data analyst. I work with the mitigation program, helping plan out operational treatments, prescriptions, and CWRPs. And I also do a little bit of research work on the side, looking at how to model resilient forests. I'm interested in just learning more about food security and food sovereignty and how that might synergize with the work I already do.
Thank you. Juliana Spear, MDFG.
Yela Kesla Nuguam Golsalas Juliana Spire. Good morning. My name is Juliana Spire. I'm from the MDFG from Musqueam Zaudel, and I also work for the Musqueam Zaudel Fisheries Group. I'm a research coordinator for a project that's looking at forestry impact on salmon that's funded by BC Shrift. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Lori Sanders. If you're able to introduce yourself.
Hi, is my camera working?
Yep.
Lori Saunders. I am coming from the traditional territories of the Newhawk Nation. I work for Honeyguatine First Nations as the Clean Energy Coordinator. Nice to meet everyone.
Glad you're able to join us. Serena Michelle Grenier.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Serena Michelle Grenier. I am the new stewardship manager for Kanakabar Indian Band. One of my responsibilities is taking up fisheries monitoring management. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to stepping into this new role and learning what I can today.
Thank you for sharing. Brody Tenbos. You're able to introduce yourself, Brody.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I work with Scotland's First Nations under emergency planning and fisheries.
Thank you very much. Isabel Howd. Sorry if I'm not getting that right.
It's Hood as in Robin Hood.
Okay.
Good morning. I work with the Shisha Nation, the Rights and Title Department, and I deal mostly with forest management and resource management.
Thank you for joining us. Before I turn it over to Hiamar, is there anyone who has not had a chance to introduce themselves and ask any question? And it's okay if people are listening in and multitasking. I'd like to turn it over to Hiamara, who will make a few comments about the webinar series that she's kind of led the development of, and then she will introduce our presenter. Hiamara, if you want to take it away.
Thank you, Casey. It is an honor to welcome you all to this meaningful gathering, the First Nations Resilience webinar. Today, we come together on the traditional and unceded territories of the many First Nations in British Columbia to reflect, to learn, and to be inspired by the leadership and the wisdom that has sustained these lands for millennia. Resilience is not just a concept, I see it as a way of life. It's rooted in the deep connection to the natural world, where knowledge and land and water and ecosystems have been cultivated and passed down through generations. This knowledge is not just history, but it's a path forward, a guide for how we can all live in balance and harmony with our environment in a time of growing challenges. Across British Columbia, First Nations are leading the way in environmental stewardship, adaptation, and restoration, from salmon recovery to sustainable forestry to protecting biodiversity and addressing the impacts of climate change. First Nations are demonstrating resiliency, but also creating blueprints for how we all, as broader society, can work together to build a sustainable future. Our remarkable example of this leadership can be found in the work of the Okanagan Nation Alliance on the groundbreaking Okanagan River Restoration Initiative. Since 2008, this initiative has encompassed over 15 projects aimed to restoring the ecological integrity of the Okanagan River, a lifeline for salmon, wildlife, and the people who depend on it. This work reflects vital technical expertise as well as deep respect for the interconnectedness of the living things. It is my great privilege today to introduce Caroline Alex Carey, as she's a fishery biologist and fluvial geomorphologist whose dedication and expertise have been instrumental in the success of the Okanagan River Restoration Initiative. Caroline, under the guidance of the Knowledge Keepers, has worked tirelessly to combine science with indigenous knowledge, ensuring that restoration projects honor the land, water, and the communities they serve. Through her work with the Okanagan Nation Alliance, she's showing us what is possible when we blend cutting-edge science with cultural and understanding and respect. Caroline's contributions are not just about restoring a river. They are about healing relationships with the land, with each other, and with future generations. Her journey is a testament to the power of Indigenous leadership and collaboration in building a resilient future. Please join me in warmly welcoming Carrie, a true leader in resilience and restoration. We're fortunate to learn from her vision and experience today. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. Well, that's a very generous introduction, Yamara. I see myself a little bit more as a technician that's just done what I've been told, to be honest. But I'm very happy to share what I have learned sort of in this role of just doing what I've been told, and helping move projects forward related to the Okanagan salmon recovery, which I have been involved in. So I do have a unique experience in the fact that I've kind of been here since 1999, working on those projects back when there was like a staff of 2, and now we have a staff of 50 as one example of sort of this growth and change, and just kind of being present and sort of interconnected with the community as well. So one thing you'll just need to sort of understand about me, just going to try and talk and get a screen share sorted at the same time, which hopefully that works, is that I live and work in the Okanagan Nation, but I'm not Okanagan. I have been sort of married in to the community, so I am very, very strongly edited from a very traditional grandmother, who is a very huge factor not only in my children's lives, her grandchildren, but also in mine. And working in this, working in with the nation too, has sort of really shifted and changed how I see and how I work. So I just want to make sure that everybody out there can kind of feel free to edit me as I go through this presentation based on sort of that background, which is always a real thing. Mara, can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna just flip it right into presentation mode. Excellent. So the Okanagan salmon, they're left out of the Pacific Salmon Treaty. There was maybe like 6,000 fish that were returning sort of in the 90s and 80s and 90s. So they were really kind of overlooked, and they were overlooked by a lot of groups, federal fisheries, the province. And it was really hard at the beginning, like the 90s, 2000, 2001, to really even get people to talk about them, because they were a very, very small population. However, it wasn't hard for the Syilx people, the Okanagan people. And it was really the nation that took a lead role in trying to get people together, get people talking about these fish, trying to host workshops to talking about these fish. So they really took a very, very strong leadership role in pursuing salmon recovery, and they were very focused, and they never, like in all of these sort of like 20 plus years I've worked here, I've had meetings with like elders from the top of the valley to the bottom of the valley. We've had youth meetings and community meetings and leadership meetings. And the messages always are always like, even though the people are very, very different within this one nation, the messages is always very, very similar. Like there was a responsibility and you have to do something, and these fish have to start coming back. And a lot of that relates to the fact that the Silk people, like so many Indigenous BC communities, are salmon people. So culturally important. Food security was hugely important. Food sovereignty was hugely important. Being able to sort of reconnect these family values, reconnecting around fish were very important. Like this, just layers upon layers of information and prioritizing concepts around how to bring these fish back. Part of the reason that the fish weren't even here or had been so strongly impacted was that in this narrow little valley, so the Okanagan Valley is only about 5 kilometers wide. And there's a high elevation headlands, and then steep canyons, and then 5 kilometers of like valley bottom. So not only is that where all the salmon predominate outside of sort of rainbow trout and other indigenous high elevation species, but they really, really stick to these low elevation spaces, which is exactly where the settler communities really started to develop and change a lot of these areas. So dams were put onto all of the headwater lakes of the Okanagan. So there's dams that were added, and they were added like very early on to control and manage flooding, and also to control and manage wetlands and floodplains, because they became very interesting in the land grab for agricultural land. So the Okanagan Outlet Dam, for example, was first installed in 1912. It's been refurbished in 1925, 1930, and then again, the version that we're looking at right now is from the 1950s. Skaha Outlet Dam was also installed in the 1950s, and McIntyre Dam was actually first installed in 1915. So salmon, these are dams that had no salmon passage at it. So salmon were getting stuffed down further and further down the valley. They can't really make it past McIntyre Dam now as of 1915. In addition to that, in the 1950s, because again, this whole lower 5 kilometers width of this valley, it was a beautiful floodplain. And now infrastructure has started to seep in, and there was a lot of concern because of infrastructure that was very, very poorly placed, very, very close to these rivers. So not only is the wetlands being drained and floodplains being disconnected, but now the river is still flooding, and it's being more and more confined. So there's larger dikes, and it was actually channelized. So we lost about half of the river, so only 50% of the river length is left. These are all very highly viable salmon spawning areas in all of these sections. So there's little sections of the river there you can see kind of between Okanagan Dam and then the next lake. All these little chunks of river between these lakes were all spawning areas and rearing areas, and sockeye need lakes. So sockeye now can only access the Soyuz Lake. They can't access the lakes of Skaha and Okanagan as of 1915, and now the river is being channelized in the 1950s. So when they did that, they pretty much made amazing bass habitat by putting these vertical drop structures, which you can see as the lower photo, that kind of cut the slope, the hydraulic jump. And so it created this river that no longer really moves and retains gravel, doesn't really have much energy that way, and is diked from bank to bank. This greatly simplified salmon habitat. It removed spawning areas. It created a lot of space where milfoil flourishes, bass, which are an introduced species by the province, also as early as 1890. It's very prolific. They're ambush predators. They hang out in the milfoil that was there, and salmon kind of even trying to get through, they really kind of peg off and eat. So we've really damaged these indigenous fish species, and and very little of the natural river is left. There's only 3 kilometers of that entire river that's left in its natural form, and that's the section that runs to the Osoyoos Indian Band. It was saved by the band. The rest of the river has been channelized. So we have 30 kilometers of channelized river, 3 kilometers of unaltered natural river, and another 2 kilometers of what we call setback. So the dike is set back a little bit, so there's a little bit of floodplain inundation, but it's still sort of diked. And in general, if you snorkel this river in August, you would see probably in that 3 kilometers of river about 150 rainbow trout. In the setback section, which is roughly similar in length, would be about half that, always about half of what we see in the natural river, so about 75 rainbow trout. And in the channelized section, we would see 0 consistently, like year after year. We've also, as I said, brought in some invasive species, which also adds a lot of issue to the area. So these valley changes you can see in this photo comparison, aerial photo comparison, goes from this very tortuously meandered, very long river, very connected, full of wetlands, full of floodplains, lots of flood capacity. That flood capacity was huge in terms of moderating floods and droughts over the years, then has now shifted to this diked section with what we call these VDSs, or vertical drop structures. That's because they made the river faster and it was going to erode the bank. So they put those cement drop structures. They're passable by fish, but they're drop structures that kind of do these like segmented backwater of the Okanagan River. So the Okanagan River is connected to the Columbia. So this is the Columbia River species. There used to be 8+ different stocks, healthy stocks of sockeye salmon. There's now only Okanagan sockeye and Wenatchee sockeye. There's an endangered redfish lake sockeye out of the Snake River. Less than 100 fish come back to that space. And there are main stem hydroelectric dams. There is 9 of them on the Columbia River. And each of those dams, as sockeye migrate downstream with the turbines that exist at them, we lose sort of 8 to 15% of smolts get lost at each of the dams. So we have a lot of impacts of smolts moving downstream. So it just adds to this heavy burden of these terrible things that these fish go through. In the 80s, Dr. Fryer wrote a paper about sockeye and the history of sockeye, the Okanagan sockeye. And I think it's either the first sentence or the last sentence, I can't remember now, says it's amazing these fish are even still coming back, given what we've done to them. So we not only have sockeye salmon in the Okanagan, we also have Chinook. They are rare and endangered, and we have both summer and fall Chinook. Steelhead come back. They're very rare. They're basically in the States. They're part of the Endangered Species Act, which is the act somebody was asking about in the States. So we have the SARA Act in Canada, and the Endangered Species Act is the US Act. Once they pass the 49th parallel, they're pretty much considered rainbow trout. So it was really difficult also to get them on the radar. Coho have been extirpated, lamprey have been extirpated, and then the kokanee and rainbow trout populations have been in decline in the Okanagan Valley. But we've never been cut off by main stem dams like the Columbia has. Because Chief Joe and Grand Coulee, which are just at the turnoff as the Columbia veers off from the Okanagan, those had major fish passage, huge dams in the 1930s and 40s. As I was mentioning, the amount of valley changes that also occurred, not only that, but these species, 13 exotic fish species have been introduced to the valley. Most of them by Johnny Appleseed, some of them have sort of migrated in, and we're still concerned about additional fish coming in like pike and walleye, which we don't have here, ever. There's also mysid shrimp were introduced into Okanagan Lake. This is another huge problem for fish that are trying to live off of the mysid shrimp that are a main food source for sockeye fry. They are now a competitor. They were added in 1966 by the province under a belief that they would actually augment the population, but they actually have become a competitor. And then Eurasian milfoil is kind of spread throughout the area as well, which causes a whole other bunch of issues. One of them being the fact that it creates anoxic conditions in a place like a Soyuz lake, which was the only lake that the sockeye had access to, any of the salmon had access to. And as temperatures kind of come down from the top and these anoxic conditions come up from the bottom, it leaves a very thin white layer there that the fish can actually live and breathe and exist in. So the nation was dealing with all of this, all of these issues, and have like on a number of levels and cases sort of stated that this is this responsibility that they're going to take on, and they're going to figure out how to move forward with restoration. And it was really kind of left a lot to the nation to kind of figure this out sort of on their own, which I think might have been a bit of a benefit overall. Although over the years, there's so many great collaborative relationships have actually been established with individuals with the province or federal fisheries and other NGOs as we kind of very collaborative group, very interested in kind of keeping discussions moving, making friends, trying to move the vision. But the vision was definitely based from the nation. So this idea, so the red line was where salmon could access up these anadromous fish as they return from the oceans. We refer to this, it's definitely a nation concept or vision, but it was really championed and it's sort of summarized for us very well by the late Chief Albert Saddleman, who kept mentioning that what we needed to do was we needed to put the fish back and we needed to put the river back. I always kind of felt like he oversimplified that for settlers because he figured we were probably pretty thick. But as you delve into these two very, very clear, concise concepts, there's layers upon layers of what put the fish back and put the river back means when you get back to the community and information back from the elders groups of like, well, how do we put fish back and how do we put the river back and what does that look like? And that's where I think there's a lot of strength and adaptability to what is this current scenario. And I think that's also like a big value of Indigenous science or Indigenous responsibilities and management of resources is this constant learning, adapting, growing within this vision of responsibility for these fish and for the group. So through with this community vision to put the fish back and put the river back, ceremonies were then installed in 2004. Fish ceremonies currently exist now every year. The guidance then got thicker and thicker. So there was a rebuilding process for us, not only in how we do this, but how do we rebuild these traditional ecological knowledge groups and meetings and rebuild those processes so that the scientists that are being brought in can kind of do this based on that vision, that guidance. Science is really, it's interesting. It's really just a process. It's a process of observation, assumptions and limitations, study it. The weakness of science is often what question do you ask of science? So if the question you ask is how do we take more fish? How do we harvest more? How do we make more money off this? How do we move water from A to B without concern of the ecosystem? Then you're going to get it, and you put that through the science process, you're going to get an answer that is channelized and these sustainable yield concepts. If you change the question by making this sort of an Indigenous question, like how do we take responsibility for this? How do we repair ecosystems? How do we think bigger? How do we give care? Then if you put those questions through the science process, then the outcome's very different. So the problems are always really the people and making sure that we're asking the right questions as we move through. So that was one of our kind of key learning items, was just making sure we're asking the right questions when we go to research and study things to learn and adapt and grow from that. So I'm just going to break down these two, put the fish back and put the river back concepts. So in terms of put the fish back, additional meetings and understandings then became, well, what does that mean? Well, we have to put these fish back into these other lakes. We have to remove barriers. So barriers were not only removed or remedied at those main stem dams, but there's another 5 small, smaller tributary barriers that have also been sort of removed within the system. So we have to sort of remove barriers. We have to let these fish decide where they need to go. The Okanagan is a very hot, dry place. Elders' knowledge was like, when you're thinking about fish passage, we needed to think about like, these fish need to be able to make decisions. We shouldn't make decisions for them where they go. They should be able to make decisions because this is hot. And this is a space that they need to maybe find a canyon to stay cool water. They maybe need to get to a lake quickly. They need to then go find food. So we needed to find a way to make sure that we were allowing these fish passage projects related to these fish needs. On the coast, fish don't move nearly as much as we're finding fish move here. They can move like hundreds of kilometers within a couple of weeks just to get what they need. They go down to the States, to Omak Creek, they come up to Shingle Creek, they go in a lake for a little bit. They really move. They're really opportunistic, and they make decisions differently. They're a different kind of beast. And the other element is, what if we could get these main stem barriers removed, we could allow fish to get back into these lakes. Now, these lakes have been kokanee lakes for now 100 years. And now we have these mysid shrimp that are also competing for food sources, and we're reintroducing sockeye. So there was a very big program in terms of the reintroduction into what was the starter, into Skaha Lake, that's a big lake there, which is a deeper, colder lake. So it was also going to be potentially resilient and provide refuge so that these fish that had been only allowed to access a Soyuz lake at the time in 1999, one study said if you do nothing in 15 years, these fish are gone. Like, you have nothing. So there was always for us this, we have to move. We can't just talk about it forever. We have to talk, and then we got to do stuff, and we got to make this happen fast. There was an urgency to decisions that the group very strongly felt. So if we could get these fish into like Skaha and Okanagan Lake, then if a Soyuz Lake did squeeze and kill off fish in any given year, then we could reseed. So there was this resiliency to get more fish into more areas and not put all of our eggs in one basket. So the getting the reintroduction to Skaha Lake is definitely not a short term. There was a 3-year feasibility, and then there was a 12-year implementation monitoring. There continues to be a long-term monitoring study of sort of what it means. And now we're looking at doing the same thing into Okanagan Lake. So there's a monitoring and evaluation program, and it connects to a hatchery in Okanagan Lake. So McIntyre Dam was made fish passable in 2009. This was really a difficult passage project. We actually ended up creating a riffle that backwatered the dam so that the fish could just jump straight over it, because we couldn't get them around the sides. And then Skaha and Okanagan Dam had fishways that could be engaged, just never were. Skaha, that was fairly straightforward. In Okanagan, we did the same thing in 2021. But this year, we're finding a lot of the fish it's not moving fish fast enough. So we're actually doing a secondary passage this winter around the far side. And that would get fish back into all of these tributaries and back into the Okanagan Lake. In terms of the Skaha Lake reintroduction, that analysis that was saying, if you don't do something in the next 15 years, you're going to lose everything. That gave us the drive to kind of really move as quick as possible. Was that we didn't have a long enough time span to really let this be a natural population. So then a hatchery program was added to that program, and that hatchery program they're just the loveliest people at the hatchery, and they're like, yeah, if we do a good job, we put ourselves out of a job. If we are a jumpstart hatchery, they're not a production hatchery. So they've actually jump-started Skaha Lake. They're done. There's no more fish really go into Skaha Lake. They have it for a few years now. And they're looking at jump-starting Okanagan Lake and getting that reestablished on its own, and then potentially either phasing themselves out or phasing into other species, because we also have steelhead and Chinook. So they're being very adaptable. They're not locking themselves in on any one species or one program. They're just constantly trying to figure out, well, what's needed and how to move through. The hatchery program, the nice thing about the hatchery, one of the nicest things about the hatchery program is it has this community release. So we have something like 27 schools that also have fish tanks, and it was an element that kind of connected the work to the larger community, so that not only so the nation knows they're a salmon people, but we needed to start getting the broader public to sort of see this space as a salmon space. So if there would be a little bit more drive to like not lose it. And in the past sort of 10 years, there's now salmon sculptures that artists have installed all the way up the valley that had never been there before. So this space is shifting into becoming a salmon space, which is really interesting. So those are two concepts of how to put the fish back. Now, in terms of how to put the river back, we again more traditional ecological knowledge meetings, community meetings, a lot of very similar messaging keeps coming. This community voice that kept coming back was that because we have these dams, water is very strongly regulated, and we needed to not only put fish back on the agenda of water regulation, but also so much of the river had been damaged with channelization, they wanted to see that occur. So fish water management tools was implemented in 2003. Also after a bit of a study, and what it does is it tries to balance out what we were seeing as issues in Okanagan Lake, where they would draw down the lake for flooding and drought or increase the lake, and that would damage where the kokanee had spawned in the fall. So we draw down the lake and the kokanee shore spawners can be very strongly negatively impacted. And then the other problem we were having is that because they were doing that, they were like flooding out early, and then they were causing scour before the sockeye in the river had really emerged. So this kokanee in shore spawning was identified as a sort of one, we wanted to add that to the conversation of flood and drought, as well as scour on sockeye in the river. We wanted to add that to the conversation on drought. So we now have this tool. It's a computer generated tool. A key concept of this as we were learning through it was to, even though it's a computer modeling tool that provides more real-time data to the system, it had to have like people on the land. So we have multiple factors that were considered, and we were trying to get kokanee, shore spawning kokanee, and river spawning sockeye into the conversation when they're talking about how you regulated water. It turned out the water managers we work with are amazing. They're great. They actually now know more about like the timing than sometimes they're telling it. They're calling us and like they're really worried about the sockeye downstream because they can see these snowpacks building up. So it was a great way to get all of the people that were making these decisions on water management constantly in the same room. So again, this collaboration, getting people back on the table, getting people back to talking about fish more often, which was lost before. And then although this is a computer model that we actually game with, or the water managers, fisheries in the nation have access to this, to seeing how this is playing out for water management and if it's impacting flood and scour based on snow pillow data, we've added a lot of real-time data to the system, which the water managers makes their job better. So we're keeping this conversation moving about adding fish back to the conversation and adding a lot of real-time data again, like, well, how are we going to manage all of these elements and not just focus on flood and drought? Now, although it's a model, we learned very early on that if we did not have people on the land, this was not going to work. We couldn't just rely on the model. So there is a computer model. It's very, very effective, but I think it's really most effective because we have the bands in the community of the nation are the ones counting the fish, checking on the emergence. We have these repeatable studies that they go and they can kind of like do it in a very sort of repeatable way so that we have this long-term data set of what is happening out there. So we have people out there looking and being present, moving rocks, checking on eggs. It was a big component of this was always to not just rely on the model and walk away from it and make this as streamlined as possible, but to really keep the community on the land and keep the community connected to these fish and having that feedback loop. We learned a lot about the model and about what it gave us a really good understanding of the variance of that. This modeling is the one figure there. It can show you, it gives you the sort of this red light, green light of like, well, if you make these water decisions, and it can project into the future. So, well, if you make these types of water decisions or releases, you're going to get scour on sockeye albans here, but you'll be okay for intake. So anyway, you can get this red light, green light of what's sort of going on, which is very easy for us to have a very quick conversation about. So the fish water management tools was very, very, very key. And we've actually published about 5 papers in the last sort of 3 years about the effectiveness of that on the salmon population. The last project of the Put the River Back and is this Okanagan River Restoration Initiative. It was never meant to be one project, it was an initiative. So there's at least now 15 projects. I mean, there's a construction project happening currently related to this Okanagan River Restoration Initiative. And again, it was about how are we going to get an ecosystem back to be functioning? How are we going to get energy back to? So we had to change the question to the like, well, how do we take care of this ecosystem and give this river the energy back that it needs to do the things that rivers do, which is move gravel, flood. Those are normal things rivers do. How do we do that effectively? So the initiative has multiple projects with a steering committee that just kind of keeps weeding through it. The first project took us 10 years to get on the ground. Started in 1998, and the first project was 2008. And now this committee, because they talk to each other, we know each other's concerns. It's just a technical body. And we understand what the flood managers are concerned about. We understand they understand what the fisheries needs are, because we're talking about this sort of constantly, that they now turn around projects in about a year and a half to 3 years pending funding, and are just very, very, very effective at it. It's one of the pieces. We do teach a river restoration 3-day course a couple times a year, just specifically related to the concepts of ecosystem restoration that allows for salmon, that also puts the river back. It gives the river its energy back in a positive way. So these restoration projects needed to not flood, which is really easy to do if you just set the dikes back. Reconnect floodplains and wetlands, stabilize the river channel. And again, this is one of the really great conversation topics that comes out of the tech meetings about river restoration, is they can very easily get into a conversation about rates of change, which is really hard for somebody like me to fully understand, not having been here very long, and just that rivers change like they normally change. But how much is a normal change and how much is an abnormal change? Tech communities are like amazing at being like, this is not an okay level of change. This is the kind of change we would like to see. So not dialing things in so much that nothing changes, but not having a river that becomes unstable and changes too quickly, because that just flushes out spawning gravels and doesn't actually fit. So that is a great value, additional value to this tech guidance that we get. So we have done multiple projects. This is one of the first ones where these side channels or these oxbows were reconnected, dikes were set back. It's very much greened up. Then the floodplains were reconnected. There was another series of projects making wetlands into these areas, cutting down spaces, trying to get cottonwoods, which was identified by tech communities. Cottonwoods and Chinook needed to find a way to talk to each other in the spring. So then that kind of information was sent to our team, and we're like, we'll figure out how to make that happen, what that looks like. Side channels, ephemeral side channels were reconnected, permanent side channels were reconnected. And now these drop structures, we're looking at finding ways to make them obsolete and make them go away. So we are backwatering them with riffles that also have spawning gravels that are easy for fish to migrate and are naturally found in rivers. And with the hope that when these drop structures come to the end of their life, which is pretty quick here, the whole movement of putting cement in rivers, there's a big, like 30s, 40s, 50s, dams, drop structures, weirs, all this cement was added to rivers. Well, in the next 5-10 years, all of that, the cement only lasts 100 years at best. So all of that is going to be obsolete. So there needs to be other ways of dealing with removing it, and what is that going to look like? So that is one of these tester projects, which is working quite effectively. And spawning beds. So in areas where this is in Penticton, where Mandy and I live, and the river was completely channelized from lake to lake, all the spawning areas were removed. So large spawning beds were also added. So this was none of this happened overnight. None of this was easy. All of it was led by the nation. It was always on the land. It was always adaptable. It was always collaborative. It was always finding a way to make more friends. It was never again, this is your job to filter me. In my time here, and this is an observation, nobody ever talked about how much money you can make off this fish. Because there was just, you can't, like we couldn't if we tried. Because we have kind of a commercial harvest, but it happens once every 3.5 years or something. Like it's too erratic. Basically all we do is we harvest, and we bought the license. We got first right of refusal for the commercial harvest. So we own the license, so we could control how much gets removed, how much the harvest is, and we just sell enough canned fish to make it a communal harvest to the community, and get fish back on people's tables at the band level. And you can't really have a big wreck fishery here. It's not possible here. So nobody could ever talk about this in terms of money. You could never create an expectation with these fish. It's just too hot. So I think because of that, we could just talk about what the fish needed and find a way to make that happen. And I think that made this shift in this conversation, that people now just talk about that. I mean, we do have issues related to US harvests. We have issues related to that. But in Canada, when we talk about these fish, we really don't have like this sustainable yield expectation, or how much money somebody's going to make, and if there's a special interest group. It's just not, because it's not possible. Nobody does it or even tries. So all of these projects were thought of in sort of the 1990, 1980, 98, and 1990. Many of them had feasibilities or studies started in 2000, 2001, 2002. Almost all of them, like the fish water management tools, was fully implemented in 2004. The Skaha Lake reintroduction was 2004. So that all kind of started in 2004. And by 2008 is where you really see these fish numbers change. So we made big changes in 2004, and we basically just keep doing them. We do those 4 projects, and we just keep trying to expand them. So what was sort of like less than 3,000 fish at Wells Dam, that's the last counting facility before they cross the border, ends up being like, it was 780,000 fish made it past Portland this year. That's just off that 3,000 fish. So huge returns have occurred with these multiple projects. So another problem is sort of like settler fisheries ideas is always limiting factor analysis and what pill can we take to kind of fix this to fix it all. And that's not we were instructed we needed to do multiple things. We needed to do multiple things at the same time. We needed to keep these conversations moving about these fish, and we needed to make this Okanagan specific, not cookie cutter. So we needed to learn and adapt from this space. So that was a lot of like the goals that we were sort of given to kind of process, to change the question as we work through our science process. So now the Okanagan sockeye run make up about 90% of all the Columbia River sockeye that are returning. And the nation now does have an ability to harvest fish. We are, first of all, not done. We're not resting on the laurels of any of this. There's a lot of we've been told that every nation member needs to have food. Once every nation member has food, the bears are fed, the birds are fed, and the land is fed, then we would be done. So we're not there. And so we're also not really resting on like, we yay. But like, well, we figured out a bunch of things, but we have to keep going. And now we have some additional issues that are going to come, they're going to hit us hard here because we're already quite hot in terms of climate change and climate change resilience. We're trying to get our head wrapped around like, what do we need to keep measuring to keep understanding that so we can feed that data and that information back to these tech communities on this is what we're seeing. This is the fish that are returning. This is what the periphyton is doing. These are the growth that we're seeing. These are the new exotic fish that are coming. Like we need to keep monitoring, managing, and maintaining so that we can keep feeding good information to our tech communities that then provide guidance on how to keep what sort of we should be focusing on and what we should kind of keep moving on to keep moving forward. I guess that is kind of like there's no easy route to all of this. And we also don't really have pretty much everything we have is because all of the AFS agreements, I don't know, the Aboriginal fisheries agreements that were set up in the 90s for us because we had 3,000 to 6,000 fish coming back is tiny. Everything is project based. We're constantly sending out proposals all year long, reconnecting to the community and the elders groups to find out, well, what do we do about this? Like, how do you think this is a good idea? Should we kind of keep going? And so I think less than 1% of our funds are core funded at all. Everything is based on funding groups from outside. So that keeps it very, very dynamic and adds a lot of difficulty to sort of work planning, but I think it's our world to kind of keep changing with what we've learned. So I hope you've found that interesting at all and or inspiring that something good can happen out there in the world, given all the bleh that often tends to inundate our world. So I think with that, I'm going to send this back to Chayamara and we will be open for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So yes, if anybody can have any questions that want to share.
Go ahead, Andrew. We see your hand raised.
Hey, that's really an awesome presentation. It seems like pretty ideal in terms of First Nation-led restoration project and looking at the sort of non-typical ways to go about it. I'm just wondering, I have a few questions here. Did hatcheries play a role in boosting the population?
The hatchery did. By the time, so the hatchery, we were doing hatchery augmentation because we were pulling off of only the 6,000 fish. And of course, when you do a brood stock after that, that's even a smaller, that we're not obviously harvesting all of the fish. So the brood stock was quite limited for a while until 2008 when the fish came back. And we had to do a tester into Skaha Lake before we had access into Skaha Lake so we could adaptively manage and see how that was going to work. So that was 2004 to 2012. And so the hatchery was involved. We did build a hatchery to augment that. The hatchery for the Skaha Lake population no longer augments the Skaha population. That we're just gonna, they've rebounded. We've filled up the spawning beds. We've filled up as many spawning beds as we can in the river. We've built 4 of them. They're huge. They're not spawning channel material. They're spawning bed. They're reinstalled gravel into a channelized system. So that is now fully seeded, and the hatchery is focusing on jump starting the Okanagan Lake population now from that brood. So we're currently monitoring a rewilding of the Skaha population.
That's so cool.
We do have a hatchery. It's not a production hatchery. Like its job is not to produce. We want, to harvest 35,000 fish. So we're going to put a certain number out there to get that harvest allocation. It's when the goal, we changed the question to be like, how do you jumpstart this and then feed your way out of it so that then this population just establishes or resorts itself.
Seems like an ideal hatchery situation the way they should function. Wondering too, so you reconnected some channels and did some sort of major movements of channels and stuff, and put in gravel and removed barriers and stuff. Was there a ton of sort of red tape to go through to get that done, or was it a fairly well supported process?
No, it was hideous. It's a hideous process. It's still a hideous process. There's the red tape though, I think for our staff, we have to kind of mentally just remind ourselves that there's 3 parts to that. One part of it is due diligence, and the due diligence is really good. I would want everybody to think things through before they're going to go do a project. The due diligence part of permitting is positive. The communications part of permitting is positive. I want people to know what we're doing. I want to understand different perspectives. We want to make sure they're aware so that when they see we have machines in rivers doing things often. So we want them to be we want these projects to be well communicated. I think the authorization of then who gets to make that decision is interesting. And then the timeline of it, like how people can, some groups can sit on permits and some cannot. Some will, work with you really quickly. Some will just sit on things, and that's very frustrating. We do try to keep those permittee holders as involved in the steering committees as possible so that they're aware of what's happening, and that has helped us move things through, but we jump through the same hoops everybody else jumps through to get a fully permitted project on the ground.
No, that must be tough with intermittent funding and probably a lot of annual or short-term funding.
Yeah, it's yeah. And none of our projects have been a single fund. They're all multiple funds. So we're constantly trying, you don't really know what you have. And so you're kind of call it, we're gambling constantly. Put these 3 out, maybe we'll get 2. This one will only pay for planning, and this one will only pay for trees, and this one will pay for gravel. And then we hope we can put it all together to make a project out of it. So we do a lot of gambling.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Do you have one final question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could, I know you kind of said this throughout the presentation, but if you have some more like kind of generalized key lessons or key takeaways for people trying to do this.
Yeah. I guess one is change the question. Science is really useful. It's not always the same. It shouldn't be this. You can't use the same hammer for everything, but you have to change the question that science is trying to answer. And that has to be indigenous led. And that's how I think it, like if you're trying to figure out how to meld indigenous and Western science, like basically if you change the question, you change the outcome. And you can still go through the science process. There's a lot of value in the robustness of the process, but just change the question and have it in an indigenous led question. Collaboration is always better. Setting expectations and having as many of the appropriate people at the table, keep them talking about these fish has been really huge. Having people on the ground. So for any of these studies we were always adding, like we'll put people there, like make people touch these fish, look at them, monitor them, check water levels, put people on the ground. Don't do these desktop exercises. Those don't, you learn so much more from even a desktop exercise if you have somebody on the ground. So that was kind of really key. Nothing could be cookie cutter. So we actually, between the two bands that are maybe a half hour apart, we would have one says we want this in this project, we really want you to focus on large woody debris. We want you to reinstall large woody debris in our restoration project. And we'd never cookie cuttered that and brought that over to this band. We'd say, well, this is what they wanted. And they'd been like, well, that's great, but that's not what we want. We want boulders and we want the restoration to be this. So never to cookie cutter and make it as like community specific as possible, even within the nation. So not only do we not cookie cutter if we go into another nation, if we're asked to like, oh, we could do this over here, like that's great, but we would still kind of not cookie cutter, which I think what DFO really would often struggle with. Like they're trying to do things for all of Canada and they're trying to make one good thing but it's too big a group. Like nations are nations for a reason. They make sense. Like they're people that deal with similar things and they have a way of doing it and they know what it's supposed to look like. So that I think is pretty key. I kind of think those are some of these key concepts. I mean, I can get into more with river restoration about rates of change, diversity, and relationships. Like, so for river projects, that just seems to be what the tech goes back to every time. Rates of change. What's a normal and what's a non-normal rate of change? And they want to see that energy returned based on that normal rate of change. Relationships, they are so better dialed in on the relationship that the water has with the plants and what the water has with the stream has with the groundwater and what that has with the upland and that relationship downstream. Also, the diversity of habitat features is, again, the tech community that's what they know. Like this is supposed to have log jams, this is supposed to have beavers, or this isn't. So those would be those other three, I think, for the tech communities. Sorry, I'm trying to do it like as a quick highlight reel, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Callie, I see your hand raised and thank you for your patience. You're on mute, I think. Do you want to put your question in chat if you can't figure out how to unmute?
Oh,
perfect.
I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
You just came through.
Okay, yeah, I just unplugged my headset and plugged it back in. Okay, perfect. Okay, one really quick question was you mentioned that Cottonwood and Chinook need to talk in your presentation. Could you just explain that a little bit more?
Well, again, this needs to be very like nation specific. So that is nation specific here. And that's the kind of tech that we get. Like, oh, you need to find, or like where we are looking at restoring spawning beds. Well, that's good. That's good. We want you to put the spawning beds back, but you need to find a way to get cottonwoods and Chinook to talk to each other. Okay, I don't know what that means. So it was these amazing challenges that we would get from the tech community. And then we would bring in assistants from the community, usually the sort of younger generation, and we would kind of try and talk it through. So we would add the biology, and they would the water levels, the fluvial geomorphology part, and they would kind of edit us. So as an example, we walked out of the meeting. You need to get Chinook and Cottonwood to talk to each other. Well, we did a bunch of research, and it turns out that Chinook fry are terrible little swimmers when they emerge, and they emerge at a certain time. And it turns out that if the dikes weren't there and the water was flooding, that would be kind of the time that they would emerge. And it turns out that California is just doing a ton of studies about the fact that if Chinook can get into these floodplains for just 2 to 6 weeks, they double in size and they're more competitive and robust, and they can make it down the Columbia better, and their survival is increased. And it turns out that if you do invertebrate studies here in wetlands, areas that have cottonwood have a different bug community than areas that don't have cottonwood with water inundated. It turns out the ramp up and down of when the Chinook would use that is identical to when those bug communities come up and feed off of these leaves that are just budding out with the cottonwood trees. So when you put all of that together, yeah, what we needed to do is we needed to remove dikes or get water, and the Chinook be able to find these places and these wetlands that are ephemeral, that have a little bit of scour, which is again what the cottonwood need for seed regeneration. And if they have a tiny little bit of scour in these floodplains, that's what the Chinook are looking for, so that they can feed, they double in size, and they're hardier. As one example of like working through that tech process. And then so we took that and we brought it back. We're like, we think this is what the biology is telling us. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. So do it. So then we monitored water levels. We took what was the mean water flow in May, because we had that information. We could figure out based on the temperatures here what the average ATUs for Chinook, when they would be emerging, and make sure that we were going to cut a piece of dike out and allow water to get into these floodplain areas at that May period, which was good for Chinook, and have it enough that there'd be a little bit of scour so that the cottonwoods would be happy and the Chinook would find the food that they needed. And we also identified during this whole process that was one of the big processes here that was lost with the channelization and the diking. And we have this fish, and this is for fall Chinook, more fall Chinook than spring Chinook. And so the also identified that this is a fall Chinook thing, and this is what we want you to do. So then we could figure out, well, if that's what we need, then we're going to take this section of dike, we're going to cut it down to this level, and we're going to create this cottonwood meadow in this floodplain that's now going to be inundated. And that's how we designed the floodplain, was for that.
Okay, amazing. I realized I should have prefaced it and introduced myself. I'm the biologist for the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I'm tasked with rebuilding our river here for our spring and summer Chinook population. And so just kind of any information that I can get on like those incredible interactions between salmon and their habitat is, perfect for for what I'm trying to do. So that was great. Thank you so much for explaining that. I also had one more question. So the reason I'm asking it, because the lower portion of the Nanaimo River is it's got tons of farmland and housing along it. And so I just wanted to know what you mentioned reactivating floodplains and creating these oxbow lakes. What was your experience and difficulties that you faced with reactivating these floodplains and oxbow lakes, and did you have a lot of interaction with farmers and, community members that reactivating it would, kind of encroach on their land, essentially?
Yeah, so this is still sort of a program in process, I guess, a little bit for us. There's a lot of nuances to your question, and I think that it would be a whole other day of visiting. So you might just want to call me later. We also do host a course that kind of deals with like these sort of elements of like, well, how would you connect and disconnect? So that's sort of the technical part of that. Uh, but it's out there. But we have a lot of that data, and we also have a lot of that. We've done projects like that. Now, when it comes to like heavily infrastructured spaces, we have a lot of that. There's a wide range of like, I want you to do anything that has any impact on my space whatsoever, and I see you stepping on it and we're starting to shoot you. To like people that are really, really open. So conversations are great to try and flesh that out. And then yeah, you start spending more time with the people that really do know their space and are happy to integrate or learn and grow with you. And that's good. So being open to having those conversations and fleshing those out. People change also. So there's properties that were definitely not welcoming to us, and properties that have been that have changed over the years with changing in generations or changing in landowners, and they've become more welcoming to us. There's a third element that we're looking at, and that is this idea of we've been really pushing with the cities. The city engineers have just sort of in the last 5 years have become very, very good friends, because we've been telling them for years, like, you can't save all these people. You've given yourself no wiggle room with this tiny little creek, and there's no space to flood. So they're now coming to us being like, we can't save these people. Could you help us push back on these politicians? And so they've been really, really helpful and really, really friendly. And so with them, we're working on a couple of programs, one in Kelowna and Mission Creek, and this is if you look up Parrish, Dr. Parrish from Toronto, he's a Canadian that looked at belt width in Toronto. And how do you define really is enough space, or what is not enough, never enough, but what is ample space for these rivers to change and grow? And what is a cheap river, basically? By creating these diked rivers, we create a very expensive river. We now have to maintain this dike. We're losing these fish. Fish and dikes do not work. But if you were set back in a lot of spaces, then those are cheap rivers. You just let them go and you let them change and adjust. So we're working with the cities on this sort of this parish belt width idea. So like in Kelowna, Mission Creek, we're looking at about 210 meters from dike to dike. So they're actually getting on board with this idea that if anything comes on their plate and they can set back stuff, they're going to grab that land and they're going to set it back. And we're going to look at trying to get this whole belt width for this creek in the long, long term. So it took us 100 years to screw that creek up. So it's going to take us probably 50, if not 100 years to fix all of that as well. But now these city engineers, they're being so kind of, like, oh, this house is about to go because a river is about to take it out. And we're like, there's nothing you can do. And the city engineer was like, well, we can work with you guys, and we can look to try and remove that home and replace those, put people in safer places. And they're like, well, how's that possible? And they're like, or we can wait and the river will do it for us. Like, at some point we put ourselves in these terrible positions, and the river is still going to readjust itself. The river is not going to stay channelized in Mission Creek or Okanagan Creek for the next 100 years if we leave it alone. It's going to remeander, it's going to organize itself, and it's going to fix itself over time. So if we can jumpstart that or help it do that, then that puts people in a better place, and it puts rivers in a better space to manage their own stuff, manage their gravel movement, which is normal, manage their flood, which is normal. So I don't know if I've kind of helped or hindered that conversation, but it's going to be a difficult one in all of the world as we kind of keep migrating through what resiliency really looks like.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
We're monitoring the chat, and Christopher, you asked a question in chat. Is that a river center? Was that answered, or do you want to reframe your question?
Yeah, that was just in conversation we need to bring people to touch the salmon. And so River Center is an opportunity for scientists to monitor the river, but also invite public and community to engage with the river as well. So it's also a learning center and a monitoring center. That's what my question was.
We don't have a center like that, so we do like on the land learning pieces. We do have a hatchery that like usually kids like to, or school groups like to kind of go through and visit that, and you get they do a really good tour of that, of the like the whole program. And just sort of whenever we can to get people out, like even when we do steering committee meetings for restoration projects, we try to make sure at least like we get people out sitting next to the creek so that they can sit there and look at it and not do it just from desks and meeting spaces all the time. So it's just a value piece to kind of keep adding to all elements of sort of our work.
Thank you. Roy, we see your hand raised. You have a question or two?
Yes. I've been jumping in and out of the conversation here, so I'm not too sure if you guys covered it. Like when I think about Lytton First Nation here, we're at the confluence of the Thompson and the Fraser Rivers, and we're always concerned about upriver people getting enough food. And our chief asked us a couple of years back to do a voluntary closure on the early Stewart run. So, it's a voluntary thing. It's for the benefit of the people upriver. And yeah, I mean, even the Adams Lake River run that flows right beside us too, and that goes up to Thompson. But my question is on relationships with people, fishermen downriver. And I see that the Columbia River, that's in the States, I mean, do you guys have a strong relationship, or are there challenges with people downriver from you? Coach Chen.
We have a relationship like you would have a relationship with your family for Sunday dinner. It's complex and varied. And there's some weirdness and there's some wonderfulness. And I think the goal is to keep people talking and to keep kind of working through what we're all seeing for these fish. There is a very strong interest for us to get the Okanagan sockeye into the Pacific Salmon Treaty, which they're currently not. So we only have friendship handshake agreements currently up and down the river, and a variety of sort of relationships. But those relationships in the last 20 years have also changed a few times over. They've done complete 180s in some cases. I think the only thing that I can and maybe this is just from, again, you have to edit me from my background as being like a technical person. On a technical level, people are easier to work with when you just deal with like the technical needs of like, hey, we're not going to get enough on the spawning ground if you overfish down there. If you're just dealing with the numbers, then it's an easier conversation than the policy people when they get kind of sort of involved in the piece. But keeping people talking, and a lot of the benefits that we've received are also because this particular nation didn't stop at the 49th parallel. The territory is down. So the reason that we even sit on a number of groups and boards in the States is because literally because their cousin in the Colville tribes is talking to the cousin up here. And so again, that sort of traditional family connections really made a big difference to a number of the opportunities and as well as challenges that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat questions Julie put forward on kind of information, and Carrie, I see you responded. Julie, was there a question on sediment removal that you wanted to ask, or is that covered in the parish belt papers?
Oh, I see that down there.
I'm actually sorry.
Yeah.
I'm looking for them, and I'm so not technical. So, like, I'm reading everything, and I'm just so please know that my level of understanding here is like so basic.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to figure it out because, like, when I was talking about becoming a little obsessed with salmon and seeing how hard they work to get up the creek beds are getting filled here with sediment that's coming down from the mountain. And I'm like sedimentation is a big deal for, I think, probably in the Fraser Valley Regional District. I don't know whether it impacts others, but when you talked about the expense of maintaining those uh, banks and the creek beds, and then like for us, sedimentation removal, only to have it come back is just so expensive. And that's when I started wondering about the 210 meters. And just wondering if there would be a way to do something like that to ensure, despite the sedimentation, that there is that room, the adequate
Yeah.
room. Because that's what I think astonished me was watching them swim up. I was like, Lord, I have like crazy videos of it and I watch them all the time. So, and I'm sorry if there's background where there's three of us in one office here. So we're a little team here. And I hope it's not a dumb question
It's
also,
not,
by the way.
it's actually not a dumb question. It's just a very complex question because there is always going to be an interaction between the width and the rate of change of a river, how it because the rivers meander, right? So the whole idea of the belt width was to give, well, if it doesn't go straight, if it's going to meander, well, you need to make sure you have space for that. And then you need a riparian area, and then you need some floodplain, and that's where the parish belt width calculations kind of come in. Again, I think this course that we do, you might be sort of interested in some of the details of that because we do sort of go through like how that interrelates with sedimentation. In sedimentation, though, is a very can be. It's like flooding. It's a normal process, but it can have a rate of change that can be weird because of something that is happening upstream or something that's happening downstream. So it needs a little bit more information to understand what is the problem with the energy of the river there, and how is there a way that you can kind of fix it. So that is kind of a lot of what we kind of analyze when we look at, well, what is the normal stream width to energy ratio? What's the sediment load that's coming down? Because all of that really does adjust what the happy place of a river would sit at. And then the happy place again typically has a biological benefit to spawning or rearing. So as one example, big problem we have here all the time is the creeks are normally this big, but then at where they hit the lake or another creek, they fan. Creeks always fan when they hit the end of their world. They always fan out.
Yes.
You see it everywhere. That's why the Fraser looks the way it does. The Nile River, it's a world phenomenon, but everybody wants to narrow that. And then if they can't do that flippy floppy, which is a sediment transport issue, if they can't do that flip flop piece at their fan, well, then now they're depositing right in that mouth, which creates barriers for our fish getting in and out, in up and down. So that is one of the complexities of sediment transport. But again, sediment transport, like flooding, is a normal process. Our understanding of like what that rate of change is and how that's affecting the river and the fish, it takes a little bit of math and analysis and tech work to kind of filter out. So again, it's a good question. It's
You're
not a
being
dumb
kind.
question. It's not a dumb question. It's a very complex question. And it's a lot of what we deal with in sort of these trying to analyze and understand what we're working with to make sure we put the river jumpstart the river in a kind of happy place that it's long-term stable for those fish.
Well,
So
I
I don't think I can
appreciate
answer
that.
it in
I'm
today,
sorry.
but
I appreciate you like indulging me into that one, and I didn't mean to take so much time from everyone else. It's just that that's the stuff I'm obsessed with because I can't deal with seeing it fill in and see them having to work so hard. So
yeah,
anyway, thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, this like if you have like a geomorphologist or even a biologist on stuff, we do that. Not to plug the course necessarily, but that it does take a couple of days to try and understand these processes to kind of make good decisions for those rivers.
Thank you for
Thanks.
that. And they're all great questions. Leona Humchit, I see your hand raised. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. I'm really heartened by the question regarding relationships because, you know, in our worldview as Indigenous people, relationships is everything, not just to, you know, each other in our communities or to our neighbors or to other people up and down the coast from Alaska to Washington and beyond. We had a system of economy, trade and barter that really informed a lot of our, you know, some of the first Aboriginal rights fishing titles cases that we have in Canada. So I was really heartened to hear about that, and I just I just really want to emphasize that, you know, like there's too much work in silos, and that this platform and other platforms, you know, everybody needs to work together to create a strategy to save our salmon. Food, social, and ceremonial is huge to our people, and I'm really glad for the work that Carrie that's been done for the Okanagan people, and you know, rightfully so. Like all of our different strategies are going to be different, but you know, using that same, you know, creating a framework that enlists, you know, this scientific work, the two-eyed seeing, you know, all the different aspects that we need to consider that really advances, you know, our rights as inherent rights as Indigenous people, our birthright, to advance reconciliation. DRIPA, we're very fortunate to have one of the very first provinces to adopt UNDRIP. So relationship is everything. It has been since pre-contact and is very, very important to us now. I, you know, piqued my interest when you're talking about cottonwood and Chinook because we feel the same about our trees and our homelands and how they have the DNA of the salmon from the West Coast. And I know our heart work is going to be, you know, much like every other nation. And I know that, you know, we need to link arms. You know, the most painful statement I ever heard was a colleague who was being interviewed for a climate job. He said, what was your biggest concern about climate change? And his response was to tell my children what salmon tasted like. So this is a real big deal. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to, you know, look to whatever we're going to do collectively because, you know, we're going to go further and stronger together for addressing, you know, the salmon crises in all of our homelands. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Baska.
Lim, thank you so much for your words.
Thank you. Christopher, you have a question?
Yep. So first of all, I just want to thank Leona for sharing those thoughts and feelings with us. It's good to see you and hear your voice again. Um, I have a question and a little bit of feedback on your presentation. So the simple one is the question, you're talking to the city engineers. Do you know which city engineers you were talking to? Because there's a few different departments at, assuming City of Kelowna.
Yeah, City of Kelowna. Yeah, the City of Kelowna engineers have been kind of amazing in sort of the last 5 years. City of Vernon, City of Penticton. Yeah, a lot of them are like kind of like, what are we supposed to do now? we
Yep.
we'd have no room yet to wiggle, and we can't, you know, you can't actually keep building a dike up because it has a sloped bank, so the footprint is big. They're like, I don't know what you're gonna do.
So was it the city engineering manager, or was it the development services engineers or infrastructure?
It was the manager kind of started the conversation. And I feel that he's actually gotten his team on board, but everybody in his group have been
Supportive?
really great and supportive to work with, and they get it quick. And yeah, it's been interesting. Like over 20 years, you kind of also like in the one space, you kind of watch people kind of come and go a little bit, and you also watch people like conversations have changed since in the last little bit, and it's interesting to see. It's heartening to you kind of feel like you're stuck because we spend a lot of time basically we kind of help each other out a little bit with like mental health, but like I just feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall all the time. So having that sort of little bit of that 20-year perspective, yeah, but the wall seems like a little bit thinner this year than it did 20 years ago. So
Yep.
anyway, it's a struggle, but I think to Leona's point though, getting the freshwater management tools, the ORI restoration, getting those technical people together, being open to understanding what their concerns are, getting them in a space where they're open to seeing what the fish concerns are. I mean, as if a lot of you are fish people, you walk into these rooms like the lunatic fringe, like they're like fish, fun. We have real problems over here, water allocations and flooding, and you kind of feel like you're the nut job. So what seems to have changed in the conversation is that we're coming into the conversation being like, we know you have a flooding problem because of what you've done to the river, and what would solve it for fish would also solve it for you. So that seems to be changing, has really changed the conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm also a civil engineer, so that's why I'm curious to know who you've been able to negotiate or connect with at the city, because there's a whole bunch of different departments. Anyways, thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I do have some constructive feedback for you. Number one, language. So Indigenous language, presenting to an Indigenous audience. I really appreciated like you put in limp at the end. I didn't actually hear you say it until in the question period, but good for you. I like that. So including that into like maybe perhaps use the word for fish or salmon or sockeye that's native to your territory, which I guess would be silks. Um, you did show a photo of some artwork with the fish. What I'd like to see you add on to that to make your presentation even better would be to incorporate the story behind that artwork, whether it be a traditional story or maybe just the artist's perception and vision. Like that would add a lot more to depth to your presentation. But the photo worked very good for me. Like I was really happy when you did talk about it, and then to see a photo of an art piece, I think that's very, very important to include culture into the conversation. Um, you were talking about, I guess here's a quick question for you. Do you know the term land back?
Yeah.
Okay. Everything you were talking about is exactly, I was saying, like, it would be nice to hear her say, this is an example of land back. And it's a movement that a lot of people are incorporating, mostly Indigenous. And I really appreciate that you put a lot of your presentation towards that, but you didn't actually point it out. And with an Indigenous audience, I think it would be very useful for you to just acknowledge that. And the questions that you're talking about, scientists need to ask. Um, in our culture, we have a term called 7 generations. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
So that would be how you would interpret those questions. So you would put that 7 generations lens into the question and be like, oh, 7 generations. How is this, fish hatchery going to help? And I think including that into that conversation as a scientist, to include that, you probably do that. I'm assuming if you have a good mother-in-law.
Yeah. 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 Those are all really sort of really good points. I guess I worry if how I use language and how I explain things, and maybe to rely too much on concepts like land back and 7 generations without making sure that it's sort of fleshed out. But those are all those, like, again, are these amazing learning tools that have like been kind of built into a number of these programs, is that, we're not just doing this for our retirement. Like we have to think longer term, like as river restoration as an example, we get schooled about, yeah, you can't just do this now for like the next 5 years and think you're going to just keep cleaning it out. Like, how are you going to make this so that sustains itself, this energy organizes itself over like the long term? So they're really, there's so much depth to them anyway. It's a really good comment. Just so much depth to so many of these concepts as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. And then the last thing I wanted to add was hopefully you and Mandy can connect and talk about the 2 billion trees funding. And that could probably assist with the cottonwood if you're going to try to put some cottonwood back into the landscape there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
So I see we're 3 minutes shy of our ending time, and I want to thank you, Carrie, for a wonderful presentation. I learned so much, and I know you covered an awful lot of ground on what is probably something we could have spent days for the lay person understanding, especially from the point of view and the perspective of the nation that you're working in. So my hat's off to you. I really respect and admire the work you're doing. I want to thank all those who attended and all those who shared questions and comments. And I want to thank Hiamara for getting our climate resiliency webinar series up and running. It was shown great vision. And I put in the chat the URL for where we're going to put the recording for this and the presentation. So please capture that in the chat and bookmark it. And that could be shared with anyone. Anyone can watch these online presentations. We have our First Nations Circle of Practice meetings, which are monthly. And if anyone would like to participate in them, they're the first Tuesday of each month. So next Tuesday, 10 till noon, is our next Circle of Practice. And I'll leave it to Hiamara. You have the last word.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. I'm so grateful for your presentation. You've done over and beyond for me, and I feel even more inspired. And thank you, everybody that came and joined us. And I hope we meet again. Have a nice day, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. See you, Casey.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you all so much.